Hi everybody, it's me, Root Beer. So, I recently bought a case of DBT-10. Let me go grab it for you. Here it is. And I originally planned to do a case opening stream, and then UPS decided to fuck me on the delivery. They said it would arrive before 7 p.m. and then it came at 8. So the stream plan went out the window. Then I decided, I have some stuff on my mind that I want to talk about. I can just have a little, chatting video where I just open the packs and get out all the topics that I wanted to address, and then my camera cut off the recording automatically due to the 30-minute time limit that it has, and it decided that doing so would also just fuck the recording. When I tried to export the video that I had recorded, it just wouldn't read it on my computer, and I can't edit the footage or watch it outside of my camera, so now I'm just trying to polish that turd. So I had originally bought the case because I just wanted it. I have a lot of things in this set that I'm interested in, a lot of things that I want to play, so I figured, you know what, just buy the case. Saves me time and effort, I get one big box of cards instead of 20 different tiny envelopes, and the box can be used for storage later on. And, I have some extras that I can sell to recoup some of my costs, and then, of course, every case has some shinies. You have, the FFRs and the regular FRs, so, I could bling out the decks a little bit. So I figured we could go over the results of my pulls, and as far as the shinies go, here they are. So I got an FFR, or, no, that's the... Okay, so I got an FFR of the Dark State Cycle card. I got an FFR of Leonorin Mask, and this is a 1 in 3 cases thing, but I got the SEC for Astroya Mask. So, just all 3 shinies are, cards that I have been very vocally, shitting on in the past. So, we recently got news for the product stream of what's coming up in the future, and so we already know there's going to be a new Leonorin in set 13, so I'm just sitting here okay, well, I already didn't like Leonorin Mask, because, it's just a generic, stand 2 things. I wish they did more with the, multi-boost and triple drive. And so I pulled the FFR of the card I just got done saying I hated. And then, with these two, it's I've never been super duper into Dark States. I always thought Unico was just a very, meh deck, and I thought that the Astroya Mask was the worst one when we were doing the set review. So, of course, pulled the super duper extra rare version of that. Go me. Anyways, so Triple R's played out more or less how I expected, so got on average 5 or 6 copies, and then technically 7 from Astroya. Of course, Astroya was also the one where I pulled 6 copies plus the secret. Where this set really took a hit in the ratios was the Double R category, so you'll notice the numbers don't change. Usually in older sets, we would have 8 copies of any given Double R. That did not happen this time. We had a couple that were 7 copies, and then I guess if you count the frame rares, it's 8, but the average was much lower, basically the same pull rates as the regular Triple Rs, largely because of the mask, it seems like. And I did get a little lucky with the mask. I got 7 of them because I pulled the frame rare. I'm not really sure if including frame rares in the spreadsheet is actually helpful for people, because, in the grand scheme of, the availability, every frame rare is more copies of a given card, but, a lot of people just stick to base rarities because, you know, frame rares, there's fewer of them. It's hard to get them all in the same package if you're ordering online, you know, or you might not be able to get like a full playset if you're going for FR. So maybe it is worth distinguishing that, like, okay, well, if we're just looking at base double R rarities, there's way fewer of them than usual. I don't think I've seen anyone opening set 11 yet to see what the ratios are for that, and I don't know if I want to keep buying cases in the future, both just because of space, but also this game doesn't really pay dividends for that. You know, buying cases gets expensive, and if I'm not making enough money to really justify that, even though I think it's helpful to have this information, then, you know, what can I do? But yeah, originally I had gone through, like, as I was pulling each card, I just kind of went over, like, my general impressions of everything. So I figure I might as well still do that, because I wanted to do a tier list-ish kind of thing, and then I got really lazy, and so now that I need to just polish the turd of my video getting corrupted, let's do that just to extend runtime. So, first up is Gandiva. So, Gandiva is a deck that I ended up actually liking. Like, I kind of took an interest in it after testing with it. I was always a fan of Blade Master during GBT-11 when we got Ziegenberg, and so I feel like this captured that era of, like, Blaze more than Eugene or anything else. So, you know, when something's retired, you can bind a card from your drop zone face down, you know, gets power for every card in the bind zone, and if you have 5 or more, gets a crit, and then you can choose up to 5 cards with different grade, reveal the top 5, or retire everything with the same grade. If you retire 1 or less, draw a bind. So, Gandiva is just absolutely crazy, right? I think we vastly underestimated it when we did the set review, and when I was trying to figure out the qualities of the deck, I did not really explain it properly. So the thing Gandiva has going for it really well is the core gameplay loop allows you to, like, board wipe your opponent fairly easily. Gandiva himself can represent up to, like, 4 or 5 retires. I don't think anything really has grade 4 rear guards right now. So, you know, typically like 2 or 3 in 1. Plus, you know, a certain card called Best Harvest. You know, every time a rear guard is retired during the main phase, you can draw a card, so by combining these two effects together, as well as the abilities of all of the Gandiva support that just generically retire cards, you have a deck that can just board wipe the opponent while also going +3, right? And then, on top of that, all of the Gandiva support has a very similar clause where if you don't retire something, you get to just draw a card anyways and bind face down, so no matter what you do, if something is retired, you'll bind and gain power. If nothing is retired, you still get to draw cards and bind and gain power. You know, the only real benefit to, you know, disappearing your board against Gandiva is that you're not minusing. And I guess technically Best Harvest is a dead card, and maybe that's worth something if one of the cards in their hand is just useless. Not that it really matters if they have a 12-card hand. So yeah, Gandiva is just very obviously the best deck in the upcoming format, and I'm sure I'll sound kind of crazy being like, yeah, I actually like this deck. I think it's neat. You know, whenever someone says that about the overwhelmingly best deck in the format, you always kind of look at them a little bit like, sure. And then, I did not pull it up, but I guess we can talk about Mirror's Virina too. To be honest, this is the deck I have not tested. I legitimately forgot that Nirvana existed for a minute. One of the video ideas I've been kicking around is doing more of the Nation reviews like I did with the objectively correct lyrical tier list. And, yeah, when I was going through, like, Dragon Empire, trying to form all of my opinions of every ride line, I looked at Virina and I was like, or I looked at Nirvana and was like, oh yeah, this exists, doesn't it? So yeah, unfortunately, like, crossover dress just has never really captured me. I played it initially when Set 6 came out. I've always held on to Nirvana as, like, my meta-adjacent deck of choice in the early days, and then Crossover Dress just never really found a solid identity for itself. I thought Bower Virina was kind of cool, where it got, like, the drive checks and power based on open circles, so it was a more removal-focused strategy, like a lot of other Dragon Empire decks, and then Set 9 tried to make this, like, awkward hybrid thing, and now Mirror Virina is just like, here's a generic good card. It feels like a Yu-Gi-Oh card in that sense, where it's like, here's a card that just does everything, bye. So, yeah. I'm, like, not super feeling Crossover Dress. I haven't gotten rid of the deck just because I'm too lazy to sell my cards, but it's also not one that I've really picked up recently. Jeweled Mask. So, I think I talked about this, like, around the time Set 11 came out, or was starting to get reveals, and I was using Jeweled Mask as, like, a test dummy to test the Set 11 cards. I was like, this is the least impressive, like, meta deck I've ever seen, and it was only, like, the 8th best deck at the time I was thinking about that. So, the way Japan plays this deck is just this hyper-aggressive deck where you use, like, Rock Augur and Emposa to just attack, 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 you know, restand, your opponent is at 1 power, and then you're just swinging in, you have the power from Persona Ride. Like, that's what Jewel does really well, is just big offense and mediocre survivability. You know, every list I saw played Gungram, so you could get, like, 1 or 2 draws off while still maintaining the soul threshold for a Jeweled skill. So it's just like, you have barely enough to survive maybe 1 turn from your opponent, and then you're hoping they're just dead to 5 attacks with big numbies. And that is a playstyle that we cannot do in English because we don't have Emposa yet. Oh, I just saw I peeked the mic there, I'm sorry. But yeah, we don't have Emposa, and we don't know when we're going to get her, because the sneak peek was just confirmed to be the Mista Arc promo, like the order that calls something, and we already know what the tournament promos and the box toppers are going to be for Set 11. So, unless it comes out with Festival Collection, who knows when we're gonna get the Jeweled promo. I have no idea what this deck is going to look like now that you can't play the hyper aggro version, or at least like a weaker version of that, because you only have 4 attacks now with Rock Augur. We'll see. Like I said, like, this deck didn't impress me very much to begin with. I think after the first couple of weeks in Japan, this deck started falling off as people adapted to the rush. We'll see. So Astroya, like I said at the beginning when I showed off my, very unfortunate SEC, this deck was not one I was thinking about very much. I was never super interested in the base version of Unica, and now with Biko Masks, I just kind of feel like it disappears into the background with all of the other generic 4-attack decks. So you have things like Purple Bruce, like Granfia, that, like, make decent numbers. You know, they can make 4 attacks, they have middling to bad hand sizes, and they just sort of exist, right? You know? Like, they're just kind of there. They don't stand out from the pack very much. I feel like that's where the deck is right now, although I did just get... because I pulled this, I did just create a deck list for it, so maybe we can, like, go over that real quick. Let's not go into my search history, just because. Let's instead go through our Twitter page. So yeah, this is one of the few where I actually just have a deck log ready, and not, like, an area list, so I might as well roll with that. This is not a deck profile video, this is just, like, what I'm thinking right now. My line of thinking here is that, you know, maybe the triple drive effect is actually bait. You know, maybe it's not actually relevant enough for me to devote deck space to extra copies of Unica, which is, like, kind of a brick, and also just kind of takes away slots from other cards that could potentially do more. So I figured just like more mask searchers because I wasn't finding the mask enough in testing. A couple copies of Ultrasound Syri. I figure like if you have the mask and soul, theoretically you can have all 4 grades to get the extra draw, and that can help the deck a little bit. You know, Gungram because it's soul charges, it gives you draw power, and I have 4 copies of it from back in the day when I built Bruce in set 1. So yeah, that was just kind of my line of thinking with that. So yeah, Astroya has not done anything competitively in Japan, kind of just faded into the background like I said. And I feel like the few topping lists I have seen at the local level, some of them were just playing the original Unico without the mask. So yeah, I am gonna build the mask version myself because, again, this fucking thing. We'll see where it goes. I will probably tweak that build I just showed as time goes on. Don't expect me to suddenly, like, main this deck, though. Celeriac. So, like Astroya, I feel like this is another just generic make additional attack decks that, like, disappeared into the background. So, by default, it makes 4 attacks. If you can call Carbra, the triple R from set 8, that's like, on play, Counterblast, Soul Blast, look at top 3, call a grade 2 or less, or add a grade 3 to hand, like, you can get a 5th attack off of that, or potentially with Drilling Angel, I think that was it. Was it Drilling Angel? Yeah, Drilling Angel. I keep mixing the guy's name up with another Angel card, but, like, this one, potentially, if you, like, soul charge a normal unit and your top 3 search just happens to be one of those things, like, you could potentially also get a 5th attack off of that, but yeah. Solarion is just another one, again, like Granfia and Bruce and Unica, that just disappears into the background for being kind of a generic make extra attack decks with no real hand size. Hexa Orb. I've been testing it recently. Hexa Orb does feel like another deck that theoretically would also just fade into the background like all the other decks I just mentioned, but it actually has been seeing a decent amount of tops in Japan, you know. It's done well enough in the meta to stand out, plus it has the, like, deck stacking mechanic. A lot of your deck's playstyle still revolves around stacking primarily, as opposed to just getting that 4th attack, though every other deck I mentioned also has their own gimmicks. It's just, I happen to like this gimmick more because I'm the OTT main. But yeah, Hexa Orb is a deck that I have not fully figured out the build for yet, because there's just a lot of directions it can go. Japan has gone the way of using the original Hexa Orb in the ride line still, and so leaving that as your, like, turn 3 play, and then turn 4 going into Aquamarine, where you can have all of your stacking. It still triggers your Persona Ride, because it counts as Hexa Orb Sorceress, so you can play things like Spiral Cutie Angel, although with how fast the meta can be, especially with all the mask guys, where if they get their thing going, you know, they're just so powerful, it does feel bad playing kind of a nothing turn 3. I know the idea is supposed to be, you know, you ride up to Hexa Orb, you spend the turn drawing cards, gaining resources. Maybe my luck just hasn't been good, you know, I haven't been drawing Octaray enough to be able to draw the cards early and feel like this deck is really doing what it's supposed to do. But it's also one that I am interested in just because I like OTT, and there is a lot of build variety, you know, trying it out with the original, without the original. You know, I'm considering playing without Spiral Cutie Angel, both because the card is kind of expensive. It's only $10, actually. It's not too terribly bad, but I know for some people that's still too much, so that, and also just being slow because it's tied to Persona Ride, so seeing if maybe I could fit other things to try and find more early game plays. You know, we'll see. Expect a whole bunch of, like, experimental videos with Hexa Orb in the coming time. Then we have Zorga Mask, so this one seems crazy. It is by far the best mask, and the fact that if you Alchemagic this turn, your front row just gets 10k is, like, kinda crazy when you stack it on top of the mask activation. I think this deck by far can find the mask the easiest. So not only do you play a couple copies of the Dragon Tree Wretch, or at least you can, I see a lot of Japanese lists do it, you can also play Shadow Cloak, which is even more copies of the mask. And so, you know, since you're playing like 8 copies of the mask between like Shadow Cloak, 2 of the Wretch, and then 2 of the actual mask, this one has the easiest time just getting to its play. I would honestly be very surprised if you didn't get the mask basically every game. And then, you know, once you do that, it's like, okay, you have 10k from this, 10k from the Persona ride, potentially more power from things like Miasma, you know, and you're stacking it on top of, like, Prison Dragon, who has a crit. You're gonna have, like, Keel Severing that gives you a 4th attack. Like, the deck is just crazy when it pops off. The only downsides that I can think of to it are, you do have to mill the Prison Dragon, so sometimes you don't get there, and hand sizes can be because, like, your way of maintaining hand is just, like, not committing from the hand. You know, you're just calling everything from the drop zone, right? Oh, and another plus side is this deck thins like crazy because Frozen Resentments, you just check your top 3, mill whatever, so eventually you're just gonna mill out between, like, Shadow Cloak, Frozen Resentments, and also a bit of searching with the mask if you do that. You know, you're milling out all of your orders, all of the Prison Dragons. Eventually, your deck will just be, like, all triggers, and then you have the gold order that gives you a triple drive. So yeah, I think this deck probably takes the slot of, like, number 4 away from Hexa Orb. So I'm thinking right now the top meta is, like, Gandiva, obviously. Eva is probably still a very relevant deck. It still has access to, what's-his-face, Combine Rusher, which Japan doesn't, although the trade-off for that is we don't have Versatile Assembler, which we'll see how that plays out, but I think Eva is still going to be really good. Chrono Jet continues to be relevant. Jet seems to top more consistently than Messiah. I'm pretty comfortable putting it above Messiah. Messiah, honestly, has been putting up kind of mediocre results, if I'm being honest. So I'm not entirely sure where, like, Messiah, Hexa Orb, and Zorga all stand in relation to each other if you were to do some sort of, like, ordered tier list, but I think Zorga Mask is really good. Good luck getting the Prison Dragons if you haven't already. And finally, we have Leonorin Mask. So, like I said in the beginning, when I was showing off this, I'm not the biggest fan of this card. It is also not been performing super well in the meta. I actually revised my stance. I think this one is actually the worst. And that mostly is just because of the ability where you need to boost with your whole back row, right? So because you need to boost with 3 or more units to get the restand, you need to commit a board. And you're having to commit a board into a meta with Gandiva that can very easily take out that board. You know, it doesn't have a ton of draw power anymore because you don't have the original Leonorin skill that can let you draw and call something. You know, the deck has cut Clapping Dragon because you don't really need to use it anymore. And so I think it just doesn't have the tools to deal with the meta right now that can just remove a lot of your important cards. So yeah, it's kind of unfortunate. I am still building the deck because of this, although I was going to do it regardless. But yeah, Leonorin is a deck that I want to like, and just, it has never really clicked with me. And I believe that's all the, like, new stuff in this set. So, as far as, like, Dragon Masquerade itself goes, we can look at TCG Player. A lot of the cards are, like, pennies right now, like Hexa Orb is cheap. Gandiva was, you know, okay at its initial release. It was like $12 to $15, but apparently we've just moved like 600 copies of this card in the past, like, few days. So, you know, all of those cheap under $20 copies of Gandiva just disappeared immediately, and the deck is now like triple digits, unfortunately. So the actual Mask grade 3s are pretty cheap in and of themselves. the cost of those decks was eaten up by the Mask, unfortunately. And because of its inclusion and not being a full 8 copies per box, the Mask is very expensive. So, yeah. Like, set 10 is proving to be popular, if only because everyone is, like, clamoring for Gandiva. Unfortunately, like, the Mask and also a lot of the older support cards for all of the existing Mask units, like, let's see how much Roaming Prison Dragon is right now. Yeah, good luck with Prison Dragons, my guy. So yeah, I think the problem with the Mask decks is just, like, older cards being tremendously expensive now if you didn't get into them before, and the Mask itself eating up a lot of the cost means even though the Mask themselves are cheap, like, the decks are still expensive. I think if you want a meta-relevant deck that is also cheap, you might just have to go for Hexa Orb. So yeah, that's going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye-bye.